EAGLES, Eagles.
Welcome in, Eagles fans. Welcome in, Birds 365 fans. A Wednesday edition of Birds 365. Happy to be back here with you. Week is cruising right along midweek. Wednesday, cruising, waiting now for official training camp to begin, which is 6 or 7 weeks out. Johnny Mac, good Wednesday to you, sir. How you doing this morning?
Doing well. Yeah, doing better than the New York Jets.
Yeah, we'll talk about Hassan Reddick doesn't show up. Jets, all sorts of problems.
Aaron Rodgers
Rodgers doesn't show up. All sorts of problems in New York for the Jets minicamp, which got underway. But 86 days, Johnny Mac. I saw that from one of our Eagles accounts on Twitter this morning. 86 days out from the Eagles season opener. We are closer than I imagined. We are right around the corner. Let me shut off that. Sorry about that. We are right around the corner from the season.
It seems too long for me. I'd like to fast forward right to the start of the season, but obviously you can't do that. You got to prepare, and we got to go through the grind of training camp, but it's coming sooner than people expect, no question about it. But this is the kind of, the one period of the year where it's a bit of the a dead time, and it'll start next week for the NFL as a whole, because most teams are actually having their mini camps this week. Eagles obviously are done, but it's it's not a dead time from the perspective of people talking. And yesterday was a lot of Jalen Hurts talk because of what he said, and Nick Sirianni. In a lot of ways, people, as I said, you give them the baton, they run a million different ways if you don't give them a clear finish line, and that's what the Eagles did. So I'm sure they're already, at least the business people and the PR people are already chomping at the bit to get back so they can correct some of these things.
Yeah, the Eagles PR staff is chomping at the bit for sure. You know what? I listened to a bunch of people talk about the Jalen Hurts thing yesterday. I don't want to make too much of the comments about Nick Sirianni, but where I will say is, you're the starting quarterback of the football team. I don't care what you think of Nick Sirianni. You should have backed him in that moment. You should have backed him as a show of leadership, as a show for the fans, for the people in the locker room, for your head coach. Let's figure this thing out. Let's go in this together and be one team. And I thought he failed at that opportunity, and that's disappointing.
Yeah, and the comments as a whole, and it really wasn't the comments. It was more of the lack of comments, which were, pretty easy to navigate if you just wanted to navigate them. And Jalen's, we use that word intentional enough to do that. I go back to the Seattle game. I've been talking about it. He still has not taken accountability for that. And the head coach jumped on the sword for him.
Yeah.
And AJ did, but he didn't. And I bring that up all the time. So I'm not sitting here and telling people that the relationship is fractured or anything of that nature. Maybe it's just because I've been accused of this, and, by people like, you're laser focused and you're not thinking about other people. And, maybe you need to think about other people more. So I'm by no means am I trying to say it's a fractured relationship, but typically, when your head coach jumps on a sword for you, you want to jump on a sword for them. And maybe that's just Jalen's personality. We talk about the stoicism all the time. It's good when you're winning. It's not necessarily as good when you're not winning consistently. And maybe that's just who he is. Could be as simple as that.
How do you handle that, though? Because you're not always going to be winning.
Ignore it, which is all you can do. I don't know. Jalen seems to do a good job of that from the outside looking in. I don't know if it wears on him. Like, stuff wears on AJ. He wears his heart on the sleeve.
Yeah, he does.
He goes on social media times, and he's admitted in the past numerous times, I probably shouldn't have done that. And, he wears his heart on the sleeve. Jalen's not like that. Not everybody's the same. That's the thing that it surprises me that so many people can't wrap their heads around. There's no one way of doing everybody's different. Just look at your own lives. Is everybody the same amongst your family and friends? Everybody's different. Same thing with an NFL team. There's no book. Oh, you're a quarterback. You have to do this. They're all different. Aaron Rodgers, look, I talked about the Jets, and we're going to talk about Hassan Reddick as well, not showing up. Aaron Rodgers, which is a bigger deal because he's the quarterback of the team, is not showing up. Nobody needs spring football less than Aaron Rodgers. Nobody. He's not going to affect the Jets on the field, but he's the leader of the team. You're trying to set an example. The on-field leader of the team. That's what it's about. And that's why, the Jets could have said, like the Eagles did with Landon Dickerson, it was excused. All right, end of story. His absence. In the case of Aaron Rodgers, the Jets evidently, checking in with some people, knew for a very long time he wasn't going to be at minicamp. They could have just said it's excused, cut it off at the path, but they didn't want to. They want the head coach up there saying it's inexcused, whatever that word is. But, that's a message. You're sending a message. Look, dude, you're probably on vacation. I don't know what Aaron's doing, but I know
enough months to vacation now, though. Come on.
I know he doesn't need spring football, but he still should be there.
Yeah, it's not about him needing spring football to me. Like, I don't care.
Well, exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. That's what the Jets are saying by the way they handled it. They could have said they didn't care. They could have said it was excused, but they didn't. And they made it public that it was not excused. And that's because they're pissed off. They know he doesn't need, what I'm trying to say is they know he doesn't need spring, but they're not pissed off about that. They're pissed off about, look, dude, you're the on-field leader of the team. You're trying to send a message to the younger players and all that kind of thing. That's it. But
yep. I agree. And I think the same applies to the Jalen comments. And the thing that annoys me about them is I'm with you where it's like, all right, we don't want to change Jalen for what he is, but it would have been very easy to keep your stoicism and give a small nod to your head coach when teed up like that. I think now it's created these talking points. It will probably have some ripple effects where people in the locker room will read the headlines, whether they want to admit they do or not. And I just didn't like I didn't like the moment there. The more I think about it, I didn't like the moment, but I don't want to be too much on it. We talked about it the last 2 days. We can move on. Johnny Mac, do you think it's looking like Howie Roseman has made the right move now in Hassan Reddick, who also did not show up yesterday for the mandatory minicamp?
Yeah, if Howie was a guy who wanted to spike the football, he could spike the football on people constantly. I mean, no matter how many times you try to explain it to people, they go where they want to go. And it's, how many times have I said on the show, it's not a vacuum. It's not about Hassan Reddick for a conditional pick in 2026, whatever it is, which is not conditional, as Howie said. I can move up, which if the Jets are smart, it won't move up, but the Jets are often not smart, as we have talked about pretty consistently. So you never know where it's going to end up. And he wanted a day 2 pick, and he had to go down the road to get it. But it's about age, it's about youth, it's about the contract he wanted. And he's going to play the final year of his deal with the Jets. He would have played it with the Eagles. No matter how many times I said he was not playing under that contract for the Eagles. And even more so, even if he did play it with the Jets, because he ultimately has to, he's not going to walk away from the game. He would have not played for it here, especially after the Eagles signed Bryce Huff to more money than Hassan Reddick was scheduled to make. He did not wreck the NFC Championship game for the New York Jets. He did not become an all-pro player for the New York Jets. He did that for the Philadelphia Eagles. So they're not the same situation. he feels a little disrespected by the Eagles, and that's fine. That's his right. And you can, if you want to blame Howie for not getting a readjusted deal done and believe Hassan's the guy, that's fine. But for those who thought, oh, he's going to play on the fine, you have no idea what's going on. None. And now he's even taken fines to hold out with the Jets, which I didn't think would happen. I think he'd show up to training camp and not do anything short of the hold in, and try to continue to work on a deal. And I'm sure New York will get a Band-Aid deal done, and that would have been the end game here. Could the Eagles get to 19, 20 million a year on a shorter term deal? That's probably where the Jets are going to go, and then Hassan can get back to free agency as quickly as possible.
See, that's interesting to me, and I want to welcome everybody in today. Mike, Mark Holmes, and the fake Mark Holmes, I think it is. Maria, you're in there. Crowley, we appreciate all of you guys for being here this morning. Make sure you drop a like on the show. Let's get up over 100 likes during the live stream. Thank you guys for being here. We got 2 good guests coming up, so we have a great show for you planned today. But, John, that's where it's interesting about Hassan Reddick to me. Let's just say the deal does get done at 19, 20 million. Do you think the Eagles balked at the contract, or did they want to move on from the player?
Oh no, his contract. I mean, he wants upward of 25 million a year.
Yeah, which he's not going to get.
No, and I see it from both sides. I mean, from Hassan's side, he's one of the most accomplished pass rushers in the NFL, and that's the going rate. I mean, Nick Bosa's Nick Bosa's at like 34. And then everybody else, you saw the guys sign this offseason, Josh Allen, Brian Burns. They're over 28. Myles Garrett's at 25. He's the best edge rusher in football. The Browns are going to have to bump him up. And then Hunter got just under 25 million. He's there with guys like Montez Sweat. You could argue, Rashawn Gary's at 24 million. He's a very good player. Max Crosby's 23.5. Who's a very good player. You could argue Hassan belongs in that category, but he's, fair or not, he's going to be 30. And the Eagles aren't the only team. That's a dirty word in the NFL. So, they're betting on the upside of Bryce Huff, who they got for 17 million, essentially. And Nolan Smith. So all of these things factor into it. And that's when you saw how we get frustrated with the question about Hassan Reddick. That boiled it down to Hassan Reddick for a conditional pick. Why are you doing that? And how he's like, essentially, it's like, come on, what the F? I mean, you gotta have a understanding. And he got too frustrated. And
he got way too frustrated. I get what you're saying.
I criticized him for it. He's got to understand, look, not everybody gets it. And part of your job is to educate people. But, I think it was remember, he's not talking to a fan. He's not supposed to be talking to a fan. He's supposed to be talking to somebody that should have a better understanding of the whole picture. But that said, he shouldn't have gotten as frustrated as he did. And that makes, again, the perception looks worse.
Yeah.
Like he's defensive, where he did exactly what he wanted to do. And ultimately, it always comes down to evaluation of players. If Bryce Huff can't play, it's going to look bad. But the Eagles believe he can play. So I would say, wait and see. They believe he's going to be a very good player.
Yeah, the whole deal to me comes down to Bryce Huff. It's not even Hassan Reddick. It's what can Bryce Huff do? Hassan Reddick can go and have a great year in New York or get paid or not get paid or whatever happens. And he could have 15 sacks there, and I'll be happy for him. But that's not what's going to define the deal for me. The deal is going to be how good Bryce Huff is able to play and fill those shoes. If you got a competent guy back or signed a competent guy back, then good. And I think then it was the right move. But we'll see how it all plays out. Coming up in about 4 minutes or 3 minutes now, we'll have Mike Gill, who was in London. He was in London for the Philadelphia Phillies games. They went 1-1 in London. So we'll talk to Mike Gill coming up in a couple minutes. And then later on in the show, we'll have Brandon Lee Gouton. So good show planned today. A lot to talk about. Some stock up, stock down type of stuff I want to talk about. I also have a question for John after Gill, if we have time. I want to talk about the young cornerbacks because I've been thinking about a couple different scenarios there. That's a tough move. Howie's going to have some decision making to do. He could go a lot of different ways with it. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but we're going to go to our first commercial break now. Mike Gill coming up next on Birds 365. Thanks everybody for watching the show. I see you all in the chat, Slagger and everybody. So we appreciate you being here on this off-season June 12th Wednesday. We appreciate it. Make sure you like the show and stay tuned. We'll be right back on Birds 365.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.
Field of life, First Trust Bank is there for you.
Champions on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Because Philadelphia dreams deserve a Philadelphia bank.
Heading down the shore, have a ball once more.
Here, imaginations run wild and time stands still. Because here, you can find the best of the Jersey Shore, all on one 5-mile island. So leave the old you behind and get lost in the woods.
Wild, wild, wildwood day.
Plan your stay in the Wildwoods today.
Hi, I'm Jim Muehlbronner, Managing Partner at Del Val Insurance Group. Give us a call. We're a local, knowledgeable agency, not an 800 number. Go Birds!
The greatest fans on earth. It's a bold statement, but would you expect anything less from Philadelphia? 58 years of heartache creates a toughness, a grit, a resolve not found in most. Sure, our prayers were answered, but now that we've had a taste, we're looking for more. Pondley Hockey, official partner of the Philadelphia Eagles. EAGLES, Eagles.
Welcome back in, everybody, to Wednesday's edition of Birds 365. Joined now by the London man, Mike Gill. What's going on, Mike?
Yeah. Are you up? We got you, Mike. There we go. No, we got no audio.
Can't hear you, Mike. Let me see if I can connect him. Let's see if we can retouch with Mike Gill. Mike can't hear you. I'm not sure if you can hear us. We cannot hear Mike Gill, so we'll reconnect with him. Let me kick him out real quick and let him reconnect. Hopefully we'll get Mike Gill, who was in London for the Phillies London game. So that's
having some bangers and mash. Gonna make some bangers and mash jokes. Some 10-hour flight jokes. Fun time. Phillies are obviously playing very well.
Yeah, won again last night.
Yeah, and that helps the Eagles. I talk about it all the time. When the Phillies are having a good summer and they're relevant, if they're having a bad summer, everybody's already just so hyper focused on the Eagles. I don't think they necessarily like that at times, but yeah, we'll see. The Phillies look like they're going to be relevant, so I think that's throughout the whole process. So I think that's going to help the Eagles at least fall a little bit under the radar, maybe as they continue to learn Kellen Moore's offense, because that's going to be a process, and I'm concerned that people are not prepared to be patient enough for that process.
Yeah, did did Jalen tip his hand a little bit? And I know we talked about the 95%. He's not really. Is that worrisome that we're 6 months into it? I mean, Kellen was hired in January, and Jalen was almost. I mean, I know he hasn't had a lot of time on the field to implement anything, but is that concerning that he's starting a little slow here with this offense, and it might take him? I mean, how many more on-field much work are you going to have before the season? They don't get this offense, you're going to sputter the first 8 weeks until you get it down, right?
Yeah, well, I think they're going to sputter a little bit probably at the start of the season, right? At least from the standpoint of what people expect, and hopefully it'll the adage is, because of the scale back in training camp and no more two-a-days, that maybe those first 2 games are everybody's sort of kind of feeling their way. But Jalen's history, dating back to college, he's got different coordinators every year, basically. And he picks things up pretty quickly. So I'm not too concerned about it. I wrote about that at Sports Illustrated. Until the offensive line shows up, I don't care about any of it. And then you start to gauge it properly. And by show up, I mean, obviously they were there, but it's not really relevant in spring work when there's no pads and there's very little.
Doesn't that also mean, though, John, that they're really only working on half the offense, I guess you could call it?
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's where I bring up, I always use the spring training pitcher analogy where, are you working on things? Now they're installing the offense because you're trying to accomplish that. So you don't have to go through it again in training camp. And you're sort of doing it as a process. You're not going to get the whole offense in the spring. And generally it takes 7-8 practices to install the whole thing on both sides of the football. But, you're doing some of that stuff. But also, we kind of talked about all the underneath throws, and, maybe they're trying to work on that. Maybe they're trying to not necessarily forcing him to do it, just trying to work on what has been a weakness. And if that's the case, I think that's good. But that's the whole thing about practice, man. Most people treat it like a game. If you look at, the reactions and it isn't a game. You're working on things. And that's when you're supposed to work on things. So, yeah, there's a lot of disconnect. I always go back to Doug Peterson and really Andy Reid with the 10-10-10 practices where they're a little bit more laid back. And the Eagles, because of what they were, those types of practices, they used to hand out notes for the media to explain what this is, because you would have a 10-minute period where the defense is serving the offense, and essentially they're just giving him looks like a scout team. So you'd see a big play from the offense. The defense didn't even try it, basically. They're trying to get away, and vice versa. Then the offense would serve the defense, and maybe you see an interception, and people lose their minds. And they would actually put out notes to explain what those types of practices were. So practice isn't a game. Is what I'm trying to say.
Yep. So no concern yet. Let's see how this develops in the offseason. Looks like Mike Gill is back. Let's get Mike Gill up. Mike, you with us, man?
You tell me. I could hear you guys last time.
Yeah.
We got you now, Mike.
I think this was a case of my laptop has not been turned on in quite some time, and it needed a little time to catch up on everything.
Laptop lag. The laptop's dragged along.
The laptop did not
10-hour
make the
flight,
trip
right?
to London.
No,
It did not. I'm actually, well, when I got home, both laptops were sitting unplugged in and dead. So when I woke up this morning, they were both dead. And I think I got this one going. We're good.
All right. How was the trip? Let's get that out. How exciting was it to see the Phillies in London?
I would say, and I don't know how to categorize this, maybe people can help. The difference between like a sporting event and a game, okay? As an event, it was one of the top 3 sports events I've ever been to. It was so cool. It was such a great atmosphere. It was so well done. Now, I mean, I've been to great games. I don't know how that, like Roy Halladay throwing a no-hitter in the playoffs. I was there. That's a game that was better. But as an event in itself, they knocked it out of the park with this thing. It's a shame because nobody in London, none of the locals, they had no idea that this thing's even there. And that's what you're like these games at like the NFL in Brazil and Germany. And, I think they don't even know that the game's there. Like the locals have no idea that the game is there. There's such a small presence in those cities.
Yeah. I do think
they don't know baseball, but they didn't even know but they didn't even like everybody you would run into. What are you doing here? What are you visiting? What brings you to London? Oh, we're here for the baseball game. Baseball game? Well, what are you talking about? Like they had no idea that this game was there. So I don't know how like that helps expand your footprint if you're going to a place that has no idea that you're there. Now the NFL might do a better job with it. I think the NFL games do have a better presence from the locals. That doesn't take away the time that I had because there were just so many Phillies fans there. That's what made it such a cool, unique thing is that this thing and just took over whatever area they could find.
Now, you didn't hang out at Passyunk Avenue, tell me, the whole time because
I was there I was there the night that Rob Thompson paid the bar tab.
Nice job by Rob. Our buddy Jeff Carmike said, and I agree with him wholeheartedly. So I want to get your thought. If you're going to London, I don't want to go to McDonald's or the Billy Bar. I want to see London. And that's how I kind of look at it. But
I understand that way. Like I'm not going to McDonald's or like I'm not getting coffee at Starbucks. I'll go to a local like little spot. The area that you could go walk through the graffiti tunnels and actually see something. It was situated in the middle of the graffiti tunnel. So the actual bar was kind of in an area that you want to go see. And it was cool. The way they had it set up in there, it was pretty cool. But I only went the one night for about an hour or so just to kind of see it, take a look at it. I got a picture of Nick Foles holding the trophy as a stained glass window. They've got Philly memorabilia everywhere. But I saw, speaking of the Eagles, the UK Phillies guy, he's like a rock star over there. But they do have the UK Eagles guy. His name's Liam. And he was with the UK Phillies guy hanging out all weekend. So I did see a little Eagles presence. He wore the Kelly Green satin starter jacket to the Phillies game.
Yeah, I think everybody in London is named Liam, so no surprise there. But I'm glad you had a good time. Even better that you fought through the 10-hour jet lag. You were on yesterday, right? Already on your show. So
I was.
Mike's working hard. I don't know how much time you had to pay attention when you're in London. Always with the Eagles, it's always something, and I'm sure you've seen it by now. I'm sure you've talked about it. The Jalen Hurts comments, and he kind of left it open-ended, and it was a bunny, Mike. It was an easy question to answer. You could just, especially for a guy that's been around, he started whatever games in the NFL. That's a layup. That's a layup for a 7-footer, and he stumbled through it. What did you make of it?
Yes, so I got home Monday, and I saw all this hullabaloo about something that he said, and that there's a disconnect, and this could be the start of some trouble. And I'm thinking, all right, I got to listen to this. So I told my producer, "What's the audio? Can you play this audio for me so that I can make a assessment myself?" So he gets the bite and he plays it for me. And I left myself saying, well, this sounds very Jalen Hurts. Like, that's who he is. Like, he's just a quirky guy. He doesn't say anything. He has no personality. Could he have answered it better? Absolutely. But when has he ever answered a question that makes you say, man, that's a great answer? Like, he gives you the same answer all the time, the straight line answer. Like, nothing that he says inspires anybody to be like, what a great quote this guy. I mean, when does he give a great quote that made you feel that the whole thing's on the same page? Never. He always feels like he is kind of on his own little island out there. Could you have interpreted as he could have done a better job? No Andy Reid pun there, but sure, he could have answered it better. But I think you just kind of look at it like, I'm getting a question about this in June. Like, what are we doing here? But I don't know. I know it's a slow time of year for all out there, and I appreciate the grind of trying to find some material. But I thought this was a large stretch to try to make anything out of, other than Jalen Hurts just doesn't say all that much.
It's a good take. Good outside perspective from Gil, who flies in from London and takes a crap on it. I agree. I don't want to make too big of a deal of it, but I will say, I said to John at the top of the show, you're the leader of the football team. I don't care if you don't like Sirianni. I don't care if you hate him. I don't care if you want him fired. In that moment, when you're speaking publicly and everybody's making the topics about Sirianni, it's easy to say, Nick's doing a great job. We're all on the same page. We're all working towards the same goal. I just wish he said that. That's it.
Well, let me interject with this then. Does anybody feel that Jalen Hurts didn't want Nick Sirianni to be the coach? Because if that's the case, would Nick Sirianni be here?
Yeah.
I don't think Jalen has
that's
that
fair point. Yeah. But I think it.
Zander, you don't think Jalen Hurts could go to Howie and say, "Listen, I just can't coexist."
Going to win. The quarterback's going to win.
Right, exactly.
We're talking about a front office, Michael, that fired Doug Peterson because they thought they were the reason they won the Super Bowl.
Yeah, but they had a quarterback disconnect at that time. They didn't pay fresh money to be the guy who took them to the Super Bowl. They were in between of what the heck are we doing with a quarterback and where are we? This is a guy that took them to the Super Bowl, played pretty well last year. They paid him. I can't imagine they're saying, we want to go through what we just went through with Carson Wentz again and have a disconnect between the coach and the quarterback. So I got to imagine Jalen Hurts had a voice in there to say, I love Coach Nick. I can play for Coach Nick. Because we're not paying you $275 million to go through a season where we don't think you can tolerate the coach. That sounds asinine to me.
You're definitely
Maybe
right.
I've been in
that.
London too long.
If that is true, and that's the way they're going into this, then we got trouble in Philly. I said this to John. If they're not on the same page, how good can the Eagles even be this year? So you make a good point. I just don't know if Jalen would have the ear of Jeffrey Lurie. I mean, he's the guy who deals with the head coaches. I don't know if Jeffrey Lurie would listen to that. Whether Jalen,
power. If it comes down to it, Mike's right. The $255 million quarterback is going to win always in every city when it comes to coach versus quarterback. But here's where I'll push back a little bit, Mike, and say, I'm not going to say it's nothing. I don't think it's a big thing, but I think his comments sort of hid the bigger ones from Nick Sirianni, who basically confirmed, and Jalen Hurts confirmed as well, this is a completely new offense, and it's Kellen Moore's offense. And to your point about Jalen saying he never says anything, he occasionally says something. He's very intentional. That's my issue. When I asked him about being a sponge or versus taking some ownership of the offense, he took a turn. And he got that 95% out there pretty quickly because he wanted it out there because the offense struggled in the spring. And then you have Nick Sirianni basically admitting, and this is a bad thing for an offensive head coach in the NFL. You and I know, Mike, you're tethered to your quarterback if you're an offensive head coach. Brady and Belichick, Mahomes and Andy Reid, Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts. Nick said, I'm not there every day anymore. I'm not with them every minute, every second, every day. He basically untethered himself from the starting quarterback. That ain't good. That ain't a good setup. And that's where I've been from moment one when Jeffrey Lurie brought him back. I think this is a Jeffrey Lurie problem, not a Nick Sirianni problem.
Well, if that's the case, then there's more dysfunction at the top than we like to try to think. Because, again, you just went through a process where the coach was essentially on some thin ice, we would all imagine. Now, it never came out like that they were thinking about anything. They made it like, why would we even be addressing whether Nick's coming back or not? But I would have to think that all of that conversation is, Nick, is there a problem with you and Jalen? Jalen, is there a problem with you and Nick? If there's any hesitation, then you have a big issue. You can't bring Nick Sirianni back, or you have to try to figure out how to get rid of Jalen Hurts. You can't put them back together and start in June with this nonsense of, hey, did these guys even like each other? Because you had the opportunity to make a change way back when and didn't do it. So then if this is coming out to this point, which I don't know, again, maybe I'm jet lagged. I don't see a big, and I'm not saying that anybody who saw something there, I wasn't in the room. I can't hear the back and forth, the context of how the question was a little low. Who asked that? Martin?
Yeah, Martin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the audio that when I got home, my producer gave me was, hey, he 95% of the offense. That was kind of like what I thought. All right, he's trying to say, listen, I'm not worried about this. I got a new coach over here who's giving me a brand new offense that I need to. It's 95% new. I've got to figure out how to learn this offense, which is another new offense for the guy, by the way. Me and Nick are over here. We're fine. We've been together for years. That's why we're still both here. If that's not the case, then I think what Zander said is correct. Then you have a problem when you have a disconnect between ownership, front office, coach. And
I don't even know if disconnect is the right word here. And I've said this and I've written about this about Jeffrey, which I think, and I say all the time, I think Jeffrey's one of the best owners in the NFL. And I don't have to call him Mr. Lurie because I don't work for him. So Jeffrey is one of the best owners in the NFL. However, I do not think he understands his impact in that he likes to always say he's a question asker. Well, I can ask you a question, Mike, and I do all the time, and you ask me questions. Big deal, right? If I got $7.5 billion behind me and I'm your boss, those questions take on a different frame, a different mindset. If I say, hey, this isn't working well, this is a problem, that carries some weight. And my whole thing with Nick Sirianni is, from all indications, Jeffrey Lurie never ordered him to do anything. But I think Nick Sirianni is smart enough and political enough to understand if he walked into Jeffrey Lurie's offense after that game in Tampa and said, and it was a couple days because Jeffrey was out yacht shopping, so it took a couple days. But if he went in there and said, Mike Gill, hey, we're going to run it back with Brian Johnson, Alex Tanney, we won 29 to 32 games, we're going to figure it out, that would have went over like a lead balloon. And, you know, I don't think Jeffrey understands his question. It sets directions.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think he understands that. So my point being, Nick Beldy had to make changes to keep his job.
Right. I agree with that. I think Nick, but I agree that Nick was cognizant and smart enough to understand, because he saw it happen to the previous regime. I can't go in banging my fist for my guys. Otherwise, I'm going to be on the street too.
Yes.
So I can conform here. And listen, I might not want to lose some of these guys, but there's other guys I'll be okay with. Like, I think Nick is something that is a little foreign to some people out there, is that you can have an opinion and like this. I can also know that I can change from this and do that and still be happy. Everybody feels like if it's not this and it has to be this, no, it only has to be this. No, it could be both, and I can do a good job with both. And I think, Nick, there's some parts of you when you work with somebody so long, you don't dislike them, but you feel stale. Now, I don't think this is what happened with there, but I think there was some excitement for Nick to say, like, hey, we've been running this style of offense for a couple of years. Let's bring in something different, and let's get a guy who's going to be something totally different.
I may be wrong, but I don't buy that for a second.
When you hear Hurts say the offense is 95% different, doesn't that make it sound like Nick said, "Hey, put your stuff in, man. This is your offense now."
Oh no, he definitely. But that's my.
So you're saying problem. He's not. He's doing that like apprehensively.
Oh hell yeah, he loves his offense, and why wouldn't he? He won. I
don't know. I coach on a very low level, and I'm getting older, and I have a young guy that coaches with me. And I used to be the emperor at practice where it was only my stuff. And now I'm like, hey, what do you want to do next? I'm at the point where I become
I'm not saying it's not possible. It's possible to have evolution. That's a good example. Most coaches do. But this guy's a very young coach that had a ton of success and had a dry spell. And if you go back to the first dry spell when his first year as a head coach, and they started 2-5, and the sky was falling, and people were saying he's going to be one and done, and he's going to be out of here, and he's a joke. You can go back to those press conferences, Mike, and he said, slamming the table. We're doubling down in what we believe in. We're tripling down in what we believe in. Your process, your theory, you got to stay. If you believe in it, you got to stick with it. That's Nick Sirianni, unfiltered. He believes in himself. He should believe in himself. And now he's in a situation where, yes, it's Kellen Moore's offense. He's given it over. That's been my problem since day one. This guy loves his offense. He was forced, whether it wasn't direct, and that's what I'm saying about Jeffrey, it was indirect. But I think this is set up for failure.
So essentially then, as I'm trying to read this again, because as I said, I wasn't at the press conference. I didn't see it. I just heard the quote. It feels like then the question is asked about Nick, and Jalen is essentially making it like the offense is coming from Kellen. Therefore, Nick is not involved. He has no relationship with Nick anymore, other than he's the head coach of the team, but not really the guy in charge of me.
Well, yeah. And Nick's comments were, to me, the bigger deal. And if you go back and when you have some time, you can read Nick's transcript. And he said he just was bringing up names. And for some reason, he brought up Milton Williams. My relationship with Jalen's important. My relationship with Milton Williams is just as important. And Clint Hurt, he mentioned, and Howie he mentioned. They're just as important. Well, Howie probably is. But Clint Hurt and Milton, come on. Is Sean McVay? I use Sean McVay, and I love Milton. This is not an insult. And I said this yesterday. Sean McVay had Aaron Donald, one of the greatest players of all time. His relationship as an offensive head coach with his quarterbacks, Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford, was more important than his relationship with Aaron Donald. That's just how this works.
Sure. Well, is it essentially coach speak to say all my guys are as important as the next guy, knowing quite well that the quarterback is the most important guy in every room?
It's definitely coach speak, but it's true here in that he's not spending every waking moment of every day with Jalen Hurts anymore. And he has untethered himself from the starting quarterback. I don't like that setup. To me, Jeff.
All right. Well, then the question, the peel of the onion to that is, has he untethered himself out of circumstance or because they don't get along?
Out of circumstance.
Okay. Does that make everybody feel better then, or still, you know what I mean? Like, out of circumstance, he is letting the guy do his job. So I'm going to back off and not be on top of this Kellen Moore. Let him do his job.
Well,
they still have their.
This is my problem is, again, it was not an implicit order. It was an inferred order. So the relationship was fractured by an inferred order by those above him.
Didn't Nick say he picked Kellen Moore? Did Nick say he picked Kellen Moore?
And that's what I'm trying to say. Nick did pick Kellen Moore. Nick hires the coaches. All of this is true. But again, he's a political animal. He understands what needed to be done. So I'll boil it down to this, Mike.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Lurie should have fired him or kept him. And if he kept him, which he did, he's allowed to do what he wants as the head coach of this team. He's essentially not allowed to do what he wants. He won't admit it. But again, if I wish people could be in some of these discussions we've had. I find it very hard to believe this guy woke up one day and said, you know what? My offense isn't good enough. I find that very, very hard to believe.
Yeah, I think there is some oddity to saying, let's just scrap what we've been doing. Unless he's, look, what do we call him? The Captain Pander? I mean, was he wearing a British
the
t-shirt?
Pander in chief. Yeah. No, he had a Phillies hat on now. He had
the Phillies hat. Did it have a London flag on it?
I didn't check. I didn't look.
So he obviously knows his surroundings. I mean, he is a pretty smart guy. I don't know. Is he at a point where he realizes, is he smart enough? If he's smart enough to see everything around him, is he also smart enough to realize that my offense is getting stale? I know that's a lot of pride. Do we not want to give Guy enough credit for having enough pride to see that?
It's possible. It's possible.
Does it have any effect though on the overall locker room? I mean, when they asked Jalen Hurts, okay, what is Nick doing? He's like, smiled, laughed, chuckled, and then he goes, he's bringing a good message to the team. Like, how can you retain the locker room of grown professionals who are playing the sport when you get rid of your responsibilities? Now, you guys might be right. Maybe that's what Nick wanted to do. Maybe he evolved as a coach and he's like, I can't do all this crap anymore. Let me get Kellen Moore, call my offense, Vic Fangio, call my defense. Let me be the coach of this thing.
Well, I'd like to ask this question. I'd like to ask this question then. What did he do when Shane Steichen was here? Was he all over Jalen? Was he all involved? Or did Shane Steichen run the offense and run the practices in a similar way that Kellen Moore will? So that Jalen might just be like, he's doing what he always does. He has a positive message. He keeps everybody together. He's the guy that we all look to. Did Shane Steichen, Brian Johnson to some extent, did they have Nick Sirianni ahead of them at practice running stuff, or did the coordinators run those practices as well?
It was his offense. I mean, completely his offense.
Offense, but was he running it at practice, or were the coordinators the ones?
Well, the coordinators, but he's very involved in practice. I mean, to the point where, when he first got here, I joked that he was the receivers coach because he spent so much time with the receivers. So he goes where he needs to go, which I don't think is a bad thing. And I assume that will continue. But no, ostensibly, Shane Steichen and Brian Johnson would run the offense as the play caller during practice. But everybody knew, and that's where I go back. He had a famous quote talking about his quote with Milton Williams, and I go back to this all the time, Mike. He said, "I don't care if it's Howie, Jeffrey, Mike Gill, I'm making it up, Zander, Krause. This is my offense. This will be my offense as long as I'm here." Flat out said it. And this is moving from Shane to Brian. And
is that in a utopian term? Like, this is my offense. because I'm the head coach. It doesn't matter whether it's my playbook or not. It's still my offense because I'm the head coach.
It was his offense because he's the head coach, but he said it would always be his offense as long as he's the head coach. It now no longer is. Again, you can't close the door on evolution, as you pointed out, and maybe he just woke up one day and had an epiphany. But I've known this guy long enough to know I don't think that happened, and we'll see how it shakes out. But I think Jeffrey Lurie should have been, rewinding this whole thing from the start. All right, if you got a problem, just move on. But if you're going to keep him, let him run.
I think a lot of people are on that, agree with that. Like, hey, if you thought there was going to be any issues, like I said, I don't think Nick deserved to be fired, but I thought making the change to Patricia, if it was in fact I went to front office and said, let's make this change. That change blew up blew up your hole in your face so bad that it essentially, I'm imagining Brandon Graham is making some reference that coaches were in the wrong place. They didn't have the right guys going on, which is something that we had on our show months ago. We played the audio. He was on the radio. This wasn't new news that Brandon said this. This is the second time he has said this, by the way. And I had said, I don't think he deserved to be fired, but if you fired him and said that decision was so poor that I've now lost faith in the way that you're decision making, I would have no problem with that. If you identified that decision as so bad, which it was, that's the reason why we had to move on because we've lost faith in your decision making, fine. That said, I didn't think he deserved to be fired. He took the team to the Super Bowl. He's been to the playoffs 3 straight years. Is part of why they kept him because of how he's able to kind of change and evolve and do things on the fly. The first year he was here, they're throwing the ball all over the place. Like they've got Joe Montana and Jerry Rice. Hey, we're not that team. Let's run the ball. They changed in the middle of the year because they realized what they weren't. Okay, last year, why couldn't they make the adjustments? Don't know. But is that something to say because they didn't get it done last year, you're now fired? Or did they say, look, this guy has done enough. Look at Roseman. How many mistakes has he made? Yet, how many good things has he done? You're not going to do everything right. So I think the Eagles looked at Sirianni as a guy who could be a steady influence for them that the players like. They like playing for him. They know that he has their back. Yet, their biggest success was when their coordinators were the stronger voices in their respective rooms. And it looks like they went back to that formula with strong coordinators and let Nick kind of be the overseer that everybody gets along with. And that's not a bad thing, is it?
No, that's a good point too, Mike. I mean, that I like the point there. Now, I guess it's fair to wonder if the only reason they kept him is because of how bad it would look to fire Doug a couple years after the Super Bowl and then fire Nick a couple years after the Super Bowl. You don't want to get that. But let's move on from Nick Sirianni. I want to talk to you about the defensive backs, the coordinators. Sorry, I got some lawn work going outside. I'm not sure if that's coming through my mic or not. But a lot of talk about the young CBs at camp. What did you make of it? I know I don't want to get too high on them just yet, but a lot of competition, I guess you could say in that room.
No doubt. So let me ask this question. When I was here last, Wednesday, I think, right? Yeah. We talked about Bradbury playing safety. What happened the rest of the week? Was he injured and not participate, or did he stay in the safety room?
No participation whatsoever.
Okay.
So
all right. Because I was perplexed at why they would move him to safety without even giving him a shot. Now, so if he was not in the corner room and you had all the rest of those guys, Rodgers, Mitchell, Ricks, Job, DeJean, I'm still very interested to see what they do with Bradbury. Is he still here? Is he gone? Is he moving solely to safety? To me, I'm interested if I'm Vic Fangio. I had a guy who played in this system 2 years ago. He was very good. He was an all-pro level player, playing a very similar style. I want to see him there. And if he can't play, let me be the guy that makes that decision. And I was very surprised about that. Now, the rest of that room, you're almost to the point where it's so crowded that you almost have to think about trading somebody, right? I mean, you would almost say, look, Isaiah Rodgers is getting all this buzz, but we just don't have any snaps for him. Maybe somebody else wants them and we can, get something there. We have all these young guys that everybody seemingly likes. Will somebody take a shot on a young corner because we just don't have any snaps for him? I don't know how you keep – some of those guys have got to go, and I would imagine they don't want to just get rid of them for nothing. So there could be a lot of potential moves with that secondary room that brings in some pieces that they're still lacking. Because that's another thing we're looking at. Where are they still lacking? I think the third wide receiver spot, the linebacker room. Can they use some of that cornerback room to get help elsewhere? Because you can't keep that whole room intact like that, even though they like a lot of those guys.
Yeah, Howie's been somewhat famous for the player-for-player August trade. Some of them people forget about, like Eli Harold or somebody like that. Jorial Green Beckham was player for player for Dennis Kelly back in the day.
That was a good one.
Yeah, there've been quite a few of them. Jordan Matthews, I think he was player. I forget, but I'd have to look. So there've been quite a few of them, and there are a couple positions, wide receiver. When you look at Paris Campbell, John Ross as the potential wide receiver 3, or somebody from outside the building, where would you go, Mike, if those are the two options?
Well, Ross, we certainly haven't seen enough of. We're going to have to get him to training camp and see what happens in that mix. Reports seem to be that he looked pretty good, like at least that he can compete, right? Paris Campbell seemingly was the clear number 3 at this stage of the game. You have the Smith. I guess he's healthy. There's no problems with Ainias Smith there. So those would be the 3 candidates. It seemed
except that the problem with Ainias, he keeps dropping the damn football. He's turning into Shelton Gibson, your old buddy from West Virginia. Poor Shelton couldn't catch the football.
So that could be an area where I don't think there's a guy on the street, but we go back to the cornerback room, player for player. Can you find a guy that you can say, hey, this makes sense. You need a corner. We could use some depth at that position, and there's your flip right there. So I would think that there's somebody from outside the organization at wide receiver that's still in the mix because they had a guy that obviously didn't work out for him, ends up retiring. So it's seemingly that they need someone still, or they had plans for someone still to be in that room. So that would be, to me, something out to answer your question, would be something outside the organization that they're still probably kind of figuring out or scouting other teams. Where's a team that needs a corner and has some depth at wide receiver with a guy that we like?
See, a guy like Eli Ricks in that scenario, or Josh Jobe, I'll entertain that trade scenario. But do you think Howie Roseman, who's a pretty forward-thinking GM, is going to move on from a 26 in Isaiah Rodgers' case, a 22 in Keely Ringo's case, one of these young corners with a lot of potential to keep Slay? I mean, Slay's 33. Everybody's like, keep Slay. They were the 31st ranked pass defense in the NFL last year. You can't get worse than that, basically. You basically can't go down. So if you move on from him, you rip the Band-Aid off, you let these young guys play. Like, I just don't see Howie moving a young guy like that who has future potential when you have a year left with Slay, tops.
Yeah, well, I think it might have been here last week. I don't remember 100%, but you draft Mitchell and Cooper, and essentially it's a situation that you had with Bobby Taylor and Troy. You drafted 2 guys, and they kind of sat, and then they were gone. This will be Bradbury, just might not be here this year, and one of those guys might get a lot of time this year. And the other guy will essentially take over for Slay next year, you would assume. The question would be, after this year, who else is the rest of that group? Because, again, you have Cooper and Mitchell. You would imagine they're your 2 corners for the next 8 to 10 years, you're hoping, right? 7 to 10 years. And then that third guy, is it Rodgers? Is it Ringo? Is it Ricks? Is it Joe? It might be 1 or 2 of them. You can't keep 5 of them, right? I mean, so essentially one of those guys. No, I agree with what you're saying. He doesn't want to give up a young corner, but he also has to realize, how many places does the guy play? and I might have a need somewhere else. That doesn't mean you trade him for, a guy like Julio Jones, just an old guy in another camp that just needs to get out. I know he was released last year, and but I'm just saying, you don't trade him for a veteran of that ilk. You try to find a team that has a stockpile of wideouts and maybe make that kind of flip.
Yeah. And you got to trade back. You're not getting anything for Eli Ricks or Josh Jobe. You're just not. So, if it would be player for player, and they certainly don't want to trade Ringo, maybe you sell high on Isaiah Rodgers. You sign him for $1 million. You wait a year. He balls out in the spring. Everybody thinks he's Deion Sanders, and boom, take advantage of it. But to your point, Zander, they ain't trading Darius Slay. Darius Slay is their best corner by 1,000,000 miles.
Yeah, but their best corner, John, resulted in the 31st ranked pass defense. My point is, if that's your best,
they would have been 36 without Darius Slay, and there's 32 teams. That's how bad they were everywhere else. My point is,
though, if he's on the roster and he was your best corner.
And by the way, he's your best corner, and he's got no value because he's 33 and he makes a lot of money.
Well,
so you're not getting anything back for him anyway.
I mean, I think there's a Robert Quinn deal to be had for Slay.
Yeah, but that's the deal that's a deal that gets made. That's a deal that gets made at the trade deadline.
Season.
Yeah, that's a deal that gets made at the trade deadline if your season has gone bonkers, like where you're hoping it does, like a Kevin Byard. You're a veteran player who has a track record, and that team is not making the playoffs, and you decide it's time to move on. Let's go look at the young players. It's not going to happen in training camp where this team thinks they have Super Bowl aspirations, and they think they have Super Bowl aspirations because they have Darius Slay in that secondary.
Yeah.
I get it. I do struggle with the 31st stat, though. I mean, look, I'm with you where I'm like, why would you get rid of Slay right now? You don't want to get rid of Slay when you're trying to go back and compete for a Super Bowl, but shit, the pass defense sucked. It sucked.
Well, part of the 31st is James Bradbury, who essentially doesn't look like he's going to be a part. Kevin Byard, who's no longer here. The other safety, Edmonds, who they traded to get Byard, he was part of that. And so they have a lot of guys who have been replaced that were a part of that 31st. I think what John's saying is Slay was part of the reason why they weren't even worse than they were. And some of the guys who were a part of why they were so bad have been replaced with Quinion Mitchell, Dijon Cooper, CJ Gardner-Johnson. Now, Mitchell and Cooper are both rookies. I don't know. Are you expecting those guys to both come in and be starting capable players right off the bat? I know fans all hope, but sometimes you're asking two young guys to step in and help a team go from 31 up the ladder. That's tough. You need sometimes a veteran guy in there to kind of be a part of that. And again, if the season goes awry, I think what you're saying is right. They probably call and say, hey, we're 4 and 5.
Even then, you're getting a day 3 pick. I mean, because of his age, because of
and that means worst case scenario for the Eagles, by the way.
Yeah. And they're a terrible team.
Yeah, if you're at the situation where we're in October, I guess that's when the trade deadline is, sometime in October, and you're talking about having to trade Darius Slay, your season did not go very well at that moment in time.
No,
I don't see any. I can't imagine they're not in a wild card mix.
Either can I.
Trade deadline.
Yeah,
no, they're going to be. Come on, they're not.
They moved it back a week, but it's still early November. At Mike Gill's show, follow Mike on X. 2-6 the Sports Bash 97.3. He's back from London and he's working hard. Much appreciated, Mike. I know you got to have some jet lag.
I thought I'd be worse. I actually woke up at 6:45. I went to bed at a normal time. I think I might be. When I came home from Vegas, the Super Bowl, I was wiped out. I was wiped out for 2 to 3 days. So I thought I was going to have it rough coming back here, but I seem to be okay.
Iron Mike, baby. Iron Mike Gill. Thanks for joining us, Mike. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you next week. All right, man.
See you guys.
Thanks, bud.
There's Mike Gill joining us on Birds 365. Good stuff from Mike Gill. We're going to take a break and we're going to come back. I'm going to stay in the cornerback room with Johnny Mack. I want to talk about this, John, because I get it. I get it.
You're pushing this Slay thing. It ain't happening.
No, I'm not pushing it. I'm wondering if Howie, who's a forward-thinking general manager,
there's no value to it. You got a high level
There's value
corner.
in it for the future of the Eagles. If you rip that Band-Aid off, you give these young guys a lot of reps. You're not going to get worse than you were last year anyway.
Well, you got to get better. Although all the Gannon haters, you can't be any worse than having the #1 passing defense.
It hasn't been a good last year for the Gannon haters. And I was
but to the point about Slay, he's still a high level player, and Reddick is another example of this. We talked about it. The league isn't fair to veteran players, post 30 players. Slay's still playing at a Pro Bowl level, by far the best cornerback on the team. You think you're a Super Bowl contender, you're not getting value and back for him anyway. I mean, there's no even inkling of trading this player. Now, as Mike pointed out, if the season goes awry, at the trade deadline, I'll be all on board. If you can get a day 3 pick and then get rid of the startup costs for Quinyon Mitchell, whether he's playing or not by that point, maybe it's Ringo, maybe it's Cooper, speed that process up. Yeah, but that's a thought for later. And your hope is that you're a significant contender and it never comes up.
Yeah, look, I get it. I really do. I get all sides of it, but I can't help but wonder if, especially when you hear Mike saying, "Oh, maybe trade Isaiah Rodgers." I get it, and you're right.
I said that. I said,
I get it. They paid $1 million for the guy, and now you're.
No, I said if you want something of value,
it's a quick
because you're not getting. I'm talking about a potential player for player trade. You're not getting a big time prospect at wide receiver, linebacker, safety for Josh Jobe, who's a special teams player, or Eli Ricks, who, he's got some coverage ability, but again, he didn't perform well in the spring, and he's probably going to get cut anyway. You're not getting a lot of value back for that. Could you get something? Yes. But if you're looking for something meaningful, and I don't know if you can get something meaningful for Rodgers because he's coming off. Everybody had a chance, remember, but he did play well in the spring. I'm saying maybe because you have 14 corners, maybe you sell high and say, oh, we can get a guy who's a relevant receiver or a relevant linebacker or something like that. Very unlikely. So please don't write aggregate stories that McMullen said they're going to trade Isaiah Rodgers. I'm just saying he's a good player and you might be able to get some value because you have so much depth at the cornerback position, whereas you're not going to get much back for a special teams player or a guy who, had a great pick 6 against a 4th string quarterback in an exhibition game.
Yeah, and then I guess if it would depend on the valuation of the other guys. If they think Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, and Keely Ringo are going to be your future, then yeah, I guess you realistically could consider moving on from Isaiah Rodgers. A young guy like that, when he gives you depth at cornerback position, he's panned out better than most were thinking he was going to pan out, at least to this point. Boy, I'll tell you what, Johnny Mac, if they did get some value for Isaiah Rodgers, I don't want to hear anymore that minicamp doesn't matter, Johnny Mac.
Yeah, well, and that's part of the point. You sell high.
Yeah, right.
You don't sell low. Stock market 101. And if he's not going to have a relevant role because those guys have hit the ground running, he'd be the guy that maybe can get you back some value. Again, though, I shouldn't even have said it. It's not likely. They're not looking to do it. But when I look at that cornerback room, that's the one guy you may not need that may have some value.
They're going to have to do something there, though. They're going to end up either cutting somebody or trading somebody. Well, and the reason I brought up Eli Ricks is because Andrew Pacheco, he brought up Eli Ricks as a potential trade candidate. But I think you're right. I don't know what you're not getting back probably much for a guy like that.
You might get back at day 3, day 3 conditional pick. I'm talking about player for player value.
Which doesn't happen much in the NFL.
No, but Howie's done it quite a bit in August. Most of them haven't panned out, but he's done it quite a bit. And if you look at contracts don't tell you everything, but they tell you a lot. And for all these people that are penciling Paris Campbell in, they paid him, $1.125 million. John Ross, same thing. Even Zach Bond, a lot of people are penciling Zach Bond now. I just wrote a piece about Nakobe's going to be back, and he's going to get every opportunity. He might not win the job because he might not perform, but he's going to get every opportunity to win the job. They paid Zach Bond $1.6 million. You hear 3.5, that's with incentives. They paid him $1.6 million. Doesn't tell you everything, but if you want to use pen to put Zach Bond in there, just be very, very wary.
I kind of feel the same about Nakobe Dean, though. I mean, they used a 3rd-round pick on the guy, and have the Eagles seen a lot from Nakobe Dean that they're penciling him at 1? I don't really get why everybody, other reporters who have been on the show, they're like, everybody is telling me that Nakobe Dean.
Because they like Nakobe Dean. Again, everything is about evaluation. Yes, they drafted him. They've done all the homework on him. Yes, he's not a proven player. And I get why people don't believe in him. And when he was out there, he didn't look great last year. But the Eagles believe in him, and they believe he has a higher ceiling than any other linebacker on this team. Are they right? Maybe not. I'm not saying they're right. I'm saying that's what they believe. And if he's healthy, you could
apply that same logic to the cornerback room. I believe that my young guys have a higher ceiling than 33-year-old Slay does.
Well, there's a big difference between six-time Pro Bowler Darius Slay.
Yeah, but he's 33. This isn't prime Darius Slay.
Well, he made the Pro Bowl last season. And not that that's everything, but he still played at a high level. And I'm not saying, I'm one of the first one that says you just because you're a star doesn't mean you're a star forever. Darius still played at a high level last season. And I know that's hard for people to understand because they had the 31st ranked passing defense, but it wasn't because of him. And the Eagles know that, and the Eagles want him, and the Eagles planned for him. And that's the thing. You have a plan in mind. Darius Slay's part of their plan. Nakobe Dean's part of their plan. Is it going to work out? That's a different conversation. But those guys are part of their plan on defense.
I get it. I'm itching to see the young guys. I think it'd be worth it for the team, especially if you're trying to build a team that's around for a long time. We haven't had we could use some young, good players at that position, and I would hate to see them trade one of the young guys. But we'll take a quick commercial timeout. We have Brandon Lee Gatlin coming up in 5 minutes. This will be our last break before BLG. We'll talk to BLG on the other side. I want to thank everybody for being in the chat. We appreciate all of you guys. Screwface, Slagger, SMD Eagles, Amwan. We appreciate all of you guys. Make sure you drop a like on the show and keep it right here on Birds 365. BLG coming up next.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.
Field of life, First Trust Bank is there for you.
Champions on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Because Philadelphia dreams deserve a Philadelphia bank.
Heading down the shore. Have a ball once more.
Here, imaginations run wild and time stands still. Because here, you can find the best of the Jersey Shore, all on one 5-mile island. So leave the old you behind and get lost in the woods.
Wild, wild, wildwood days.
Plan your stay in the Wildwoods today.
Hi, I'm Jim Muehlbronner, Managing Partner at Delval Insurance Group. Give us a call. We're a local, knowledgeable agency, not an 800 number. Go Birds!
The greatest fans on earth. It's a bold statement, but would you expect anything less from Philadelphia? 58 years of heartache creates a toughness, a grit, a resolve not found in most. Sure, our prayers were answered, but now that we've had a taste, we're looking for more. Pondley Hockey, official partner of the Philadelphia Eagles.
EAGLES, Eagles.
Welcome back in, everybody, to the Birds 365, a Wednesday edition of the show today. I want to thank everybody for being here. If you guys are in the chat, I'd like to hear from you guys of what you think of the cornerback room. I will say, I mean, I'm certainly receptive to what Johnny Mack is saying, where you're not going to move on from Darius Slay. I certainly get that. But I will say there's a lot to talk about with that room. There's a lot of decisions to be made for the GM, and I know he's probably thinking of every scenario as how he normally does. But
how he's good with the contingencies. Very good. That's where I think he sets himself apart, because things rarely go the way you want them to go. So you have to have a good plan B, plan C, plan D. He's very good with that.
Yeah. Do you think Howie Roseman, for a decision like this, when you have a deep cornerback room, you think he would defer to Vic Fangio just for not for to tell him what to do, but for insight? Hey man, who do you think will work better in this system? You know, which player do you like? Do you think he goes to those coaches for stuff like that?
Oh yeah. I mean, he's very above board. He said, if you're forcing players on coaches they don't want or they don't believe in, it's never going to work out well. He's always got the coaches in mind when he does deals and makes move and takes draft picks. But for those who think, Big's coming in and saying, oh, you have to draft Jalen Son, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, no, I know that.
But yeah. He definitely takes them into account. And if you're not drafting players that the coaches want, and it's difficult because, again, there's so much turnover. We've seen that in the Eagles in recent seasons. You got to be careful with that too, because if you're drafting somebody, Jordan Davis is a perfect example. They're using the scheme. They needed a traditional nose tackle. And then boom, Cannon's gone, the size gone, Big's in. You have different coordinators, but they're all using the same scheme. So it's kind of worked out in that from that perspective. But you do have to be kind of careful with that as well.
Yep. So we'll talk about all that. Let's go to BLG, who just joined us in the green room. So we'll bring up Brandon Lee Gouton. Now, BLG, welcome to the show, man. How you doing today?
Doing good, guys. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you, BLG. I got myself in trouble, so I want to scale back. We're obviously in the off season, so we're throwing a bunch of stuff. Somehow we got onto August trades, where Howie's had somewhat of a history. Never works out, but somewhat of a history of player for player trades in August. The Eli Harrells of the world for Ryan Bates, Dennis Kelly for Dorial Green Beckham, if you want to go way back. That's
wow.
Chip, I guess.
Yeah.
But there's been this history. Ugo Amadi, I think, was traded
I remember
for
that one.
JJ Arcega-Whiteside. Again, rarely works out. But if you're trying to get value, and I look at this cornerback room, which is now 14 deep, BLG, with Perry Nickerson on board. And you're looking to get value and trying to get maybe a third receiver or maybe a linebacker that can get in the mix, or maybe even a backup safety. Who's the guy that you can trade to get that?
Well, maybe you could kind of do the reverse Jordan Matthews trade and, where they traded an extra receiver for another cornerback. Maybe you can trade an extra cornerback for another receiver there. But I don't know who that would be in terms of.
But I think, and hear me out, the guy who would have, because you're not trading certain players. You're not trading, obviously, Slay's 33. You're not trading Slay. You think you're a Super Bowl contender. Obviously, you're not trading Mitchell or DeJean. You're not trading Ringo. So it goes down to that level. And I'm saying, Josh Jobe, great special teams player. You're not going to get anything for him other than a conditional 7th-round pick. Same thing with Eli Ricks. The guy who might be able to get you something, BLG, Isaiah Rodgers.
Yeah, you would maybe try to sell high on him relatively.
That's what I said.
Especially, he's 27. He's on the last year of his deal, as opposed to these younger rookie cornerbacks that they have. So, conceivably he could be gone after this season anyway. You don't have him locked up long term. So I think, but I don't know how much other teams are buying into, OTA reports and stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's true.
It's been a long time since they've seen him look good. So I wonder about that. I would say Ricks makes sense from a standpoint of, you would, like you said, I think you would keep Jobe over him from a depth standpoint, just because you feel better about Jobe's special teams ability. But again, how much value does Eli Ricks really have? I don't think a ton. I think you could get, a comparable kind of receiver who's kind of on the bubble somewhere probably, but nothing too exciting.
Yeah. That's the Eli Harold for Ryan Bates trade, which worked out for the Bills. Ryan Bates is an okay player. So, wasn't, I believe, an undrafted free agent at the time.
Yes.
That was his rookie season. So, you never know with the August trades. I just wanted to throw that at you. I should never have mentioned it because somebody's going to write. McMullen said you should trade Isaiah Rodgers. I did not say that. I said maybe he might have some value and potentially sell high. But
well, let me give BLG another maybe just on the other side of it. I know you say it's not happening, Johnny Mac, but I do want to ask BLG. Is there any chance that they would think about moving on from Slay? I mean, he's the top end guy. You only have a year left with him. You know what I mean? Where you want to get the young guys, rip off the Band-Aid maybe, and just go to the young guys. They weren't a good pass defense last year. Slay, I think, was ranked 28th or 30th or 29th on the PFF. So just wonder if you maybe could move on from him when you're going to move on from him after the year anyway and keep one of the extra young guys who are showing major potential.
Yeah, I don't think they would with how they value him. I think it's a valid question to ask because of, we saw that steep drop off from James Bradbury last year. And I'm not saying necessarily it's guaranteed that Slay will be the same thing this year, but he's going to be 34, I think, this season. Turns 34 in January. So, that's you're playing with fire in terms of a cornerback who could easily fall off a cliff really fast. And if you could get any value for him, maybe this might be your last chance. But, he's a team captain. Howie Roseman talked about the value of having guys, not just being able to tell the younger guys what to do, but kind of lead by example. And I think Slay is that for the Eagles in that quarterback room. So I don't think they will.
All right, PLG, we got to ask you, it's annoying, but where are you on Jalen Hurts and his awkward answer to a layup of a question that he could have easily answered, but for some reason could not answer about the head coach of this football team?
Yeah, it didn't hit me in the moment. But then thinking about it more after, I mean, it just kind of fits a larger pattern. I mean, we saw Jalen Hurts really not take an opportunity to speak with such endorsement about Sirianni after the playoff game. So it's weird. And the way I phrased it is I think, Jalen can be kind of needlessly cagey sometimes about things or needlessly combative about things. For example, John, you were at that press conference last week. He's asked about, what he's going to do during the break here. And he kind of says like non-football stuff. Yeah. And like, okay, that's fine. But, you could show a little bit, maybe more of your personality and humanity and say, something like, gonna go to the pool or gonna take a trip. You could be vague. It's not even like you're spilling your secrets here. You could kind of just again, not be so combative. I know everyone thinks the media is out to get these players. I don't think that's the case, especially with a question like that. Just so I think there are times where Jalen Hurts kind of again, a little bit needlessly combative, a little bit needlessly cagey. So I think that's a part of it. But I mean, the fact remains, had a chance to really endorse Nick Sirianni, and he didn't.
Yeah, and the part that bothers me, BLG, isn't what he said. It's what, and I go back to the Seattle game where Nick made himself look kind of foolish by that weird explanation about what went on, and only AJ stepped up and said, "You know what? That was our fault." Jalen still hasn't stepped up and said that bothers me. Yeah, but then I go back to early on in that press conference. I asked Jalen, the last time we talked to him, he mentioned being in sponge mode. And I asked him the question that, have you progressed from that into being more vocal on what you want with the offense? And he took a left turn and threw that 95% out there because he wanted it out there. Mm-hmm. And so he's very intentional too. So I think it's, you can't just say, "Oh, that's Jalen being Jalen." I think when it comes to anything, because he's very intentional. Mm-hmm. Thoughts on that?
I think about how, on that point, he showed up to his press conference after the Tampa Bay Buccaneers loss during the 2021 season, with the boot on his foot. Yeah. I think that's like, hey, I was dealing with something. So just so you know. And I wonder if, I don't know how much Jalen Hurts cares about these things, but I think he does at some level care about his public, or he's a human being. I think everyone cares about how they're perceived at some level. And I wonder if Jalen Hurts throws out that 95% there with the knowing that, he's thrown a decent amount of interceptions and he hasn't looked his sharpest in the spring. No. I remember how by contrast, I think he looked awesome in 2022 that year and those couple spring practices we saw. And that is not exactly the same player we saw this spring. That doesn't mean it's press the panic button, the season's over. But I think there's an awareness that maybe, he's not at fully where he wants to be yet. And therefore, he is kind of tempering expectations or kind of tempering the criticism with that kind of statement.
We had Mike Gill on, who was in London, so he wasn't really too entrenched in what was happening in Eagle Land. And he kind of came on an original. He's like, I don't know, it sounds like it's May or June and we're blowing this up into not making something out of nothing. I don't know if I agree with him. I mean, I do to some level, but I think that was an easy opportunity for Jalen Hurts as the leader of this club. I don't care if you hate Nick Sirianni. I really don't. In that moment, publicly, to the media, with all your, your team's going to see it, your coach is going to see it, why not just give him a bone? And he didn't do it. And I thought that was, maybe that's more telling on Jalen Hurts' instinctual style of leadership where he didn't want to go there. And we do talk about how intentional he is with his words. I don't think Jalen said that accidentally. I really don't. I think there was some intention, whatever it might have been. Maybe it wasn't malicious or maybe it wasn't a bad thing or a negative thing, but I can only make of it what I did. And it wasn't great for me, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think what often is most telling is what people don't say. And again, what Jalen Hurts didn't say there sticks out. And maybe, we're focusing on it a lot because there's literally nothing else going on now until basically training camp begins. So there's some truth to that, maybe that we're, focusing on it more than we usually would if it was said in, a game week or something. And then all of a sudden they're playing the game and we're turning the page.
Well, was that part of the intentionality, BLJ? He knows we're about to be off for 7 weeks and it's like, oh, let me stir stir this pot of stew real quick.
I don't think that. I don't think he wanted that, but I think he was just being honest, and that's kind of where it lies for now.
Yep.
Over at bleedinggreennation.com, everybody should check out. Brandon has his winners from the spring, his losers from the spring. I want to take issue with one of your losers.
Okay.
And not from the standpoint of everybody's got him on the loser list. So
okay.
I'm not singling you out. But I think people are turning the page on Nakobe Dean way too early. Way too early. I think we're going to show up in late July, BLG, and he's going to be the starting middle linebacker, and everybody's going to be somewhat surprised. I think there's a lot of context to his spring. If you go back to the first voluntary OTA, he wasn't even in team drills. He was sort of at the end of his rehab, and he was working individual. And I think he was back out there for the second, if I'm correct.
Yeah, he was rotating in and out in the second one.
The second. And mainly second team work, a little bit of a first team. Same thing in minicamp, mainly second team work. And I think everybody's just said, well, Devin White and Zach Bond are the guys. I don't believe that. Am I crazy?
I don't think you're crazy. I think Nakobe Dean still has fans in the front office. I think Howie Roseman talked glowingly about him earlier this offseason. But, again, Vic Fangio wasn't here when Nakobe Dean was drafted, and I think there's something to that. I think Vic might not necessarily love Nakobe as much. And for me, I always go back to, Nakobe has, there's a lot of hype for Nakobe when he was drafted because, oh my gosh, what a steal. The Eagles got this guy in the third round. Can't believe it. He's going first round in mock drafts. My thinking on that is, well, sometimes players fall for a reason. And I wanted to see something from him in both of his 2 training camps thus far. And I don't know that there was like a single play even, or it's like a single highlight rep from those 2 training camp entirety, the last 2 years of training camp. I can't point to it like a play in a practice that just really stood out. And therefore, I'm not going into this training camp expecting it's going to be magically different and he's going to pop. And by contrast, like Devin White was making plays in the spring. That's more than I've ever seen from Nakobe Dean in a practice setting. Zach Bond, not as flashy necessarily of an OTA session this spring, but looked fluid in coverage at times where, there was that one rep where he's running stride for stride with Saquon Barkley down the left sideline. Okay, that's something. And I just haven't seen Nakobe flash in that way. So until I see it, I'm not believing it. And I think the onus is on him to prove everyone wrong.
Yeah, and it sounds like like you mentioned, the front office still likes him, but how close is he to Wally Pipp territory? Like, he's just not on the field, Like, if Zach Bond is playing good, I know Zach Bond's not really this big guy. They signed him for $1.5 million or whatever it was. But if Nakobe's not out there showing anything and Devin keeps making plays and Zach Bond keeps making plays, how's he going to get on the field?
Yeah, I mean, Vic Fangio mentioned Zach Bond too, as we know.
Yeah,
he's asked about the inside linebackers.
Zach Bond, yeah.
So there's opportunity because if Bond doesn't look good or someone gets hurt, Nakobe's right there, I'm sure. And again, he was rotating in the first team at times, so there might be certain sub packages where he's the guy. I'm not saying he can't find his way on the field at some point, but yeah, for now, I'm not giving him the benefit of the doubt.
You're going to get now with Nakobe. I think you're fine, but I'm sure you've already got some crap for one of your other losers.
A couple of them, yeah.
Saquon Barkley, is in the loser. Now I'm with you. I mean, spring is not the time for running backs, certainly, and I think where Saquon's going to be impactful is in the running game when the offensive line is out there and the play action is going to help. I think that's where he's going to be impactful. But we saw his, it's a passing camp, and we saw at least some of the things they were trying to accomplish with him as a receiver, and they weren't great. As you mentioned, Zach Bond running stride for stride with him. Devin White, who's a great athlete, had him in his hip pocket on a wheel route. But Bond, I mean, he's not Devin White from an athleticism standpoint. what the hell is he doing running with Saquon Barkley down the field? And I think I want to read what you wrote because I like it. My overarching concern with the Barkley signing is not that he's going to be bad and useless. I think he'll be fine, but the Eagles are paying him to be morally fine, more than, not merely fine. Yeah. And then they use the word special and weapon, and you brought that up. They set that bar.
Right.
I think he's a good player. I've said this consistently. Nobody hears it. He's a good player. But they're propping him up as a star. I think people are going to be disappointed. I really do, BLG.
Yeah, I think his reputation precedes him. He's obviously was an awesome player, but I don't think he's been like that same level of the guy since his first couple of years in the league. We're talking about since then, he's had injury issues. He's had a ton of touches. I think he ranks like top 5, top 4 in touches among active NFL players.
A ton of touches.
So,
and by the way, you put that Football Insights tweet out. That's ugly. That is ugly.
Look at this company in there. And you can say like, okay, the Giants didn't have a good offensive line. Okay. But still, there's like a missed tackle rate in there. You would still maybe like to see, some more forced missed tackles, which is still possible. Maybe he's not, gaining a ton of yardage after that because the offensive line isn't helping him out the most. But like, and look, again, for any kind of these winners, losers, there's this disclaimer in the article too that, let's acknowledge this for what it is. Let's not make it the end of the world. But like, look at Will Shipley. Will Shipley had a really nice day in minicamp on Wednesday, a week ago from today, catching the ball. So we saw like a running back be able to kind of show some juice. Even Kendall Milton had a couple catches that were like, he looked fast after that. So, I'm not saying those guys are better than Saquon, obviously, but my point is like, if we saw some of these other players kind of pop a little bit, like, why wasn't there a single moment of that from Saquon in these drills? And maybe, he's going half speed. He's trying to take it easy, not get hurt. Okay. We'll see if anything changes in training camp, but I just would have liked to see like one kind of moment you can kind of hang your hat on and be like, wow, that's why they signed Saquon. He looks different out there.
Yeah. I'm with you. Yeah. You didn't have a great spring. And all the context, and I try to add it. It's not, but as you mentioned, and Will had a really difficult day the first OTAs. I don't know if you remember, but he dropped one. He was fighting another one, bobbled, brought it in, and he progressively got better. But your point is a good one. If he showed something, he was really good on that one day. And Kendall Milton showed something now against the third team and all that kind of stuff. But they showed a little bit of juice. That means you can, hey, let's see a splash. Yeah. And we didn't see a splash. So I think that was very fair. I just don't think people are going to take it very well. You probably already got some crap about it. But that Football Insights tweet I was talking about, the chart of forced missed tackles and scrimmage yards per touch, he's in the bottom of the NFL over a long sample size.
Yeah,
I think it was 2021 to 20.
Yeah, the last 3 seasons.
Yeah,
and he's there with like Latavius Murray, Chuba Hubbard, like AJ Dillon. Like those are some of the guys he's around in that category.
Yeah, it ain't good. And everything's blamed on the Giants offensive line. But as somebody earlier in my career who got to cover Adrian Peterson, if you're that good, you make something happen.
Right.
If you're special.
Right. And that's and like you said, that's what they're selling him as.
Yes. So little bit of a concern there. Now, since people will accuse me of being too negative, we'll go to the positive because you had more positives than negatives.
True.
From spring practices and basically the entire cornerback room. Those guys were great.
I read BLG's article. My cornerback.
Yeah, and they were all great.
No, I know. Yeah, they were.
Even Tyler Hall, who I agreed with, I had him in my tier 2 stars because I wanted to take a look at maybe some unheralded players who aren't thought of as much, and I thought Tyler did a really good job. But the two rookies, Quinyon Cooper, DeJean, Kaylee Ringo, I think is going to be a starting cornerback in this league.
Mm-hmm.
I think the best player in the spring overall was Isaiah Rodgers.
Mm-hmm.
Reed Blankenship, I'm with you. Reed's a guy I want to focus on, BLG, because I see a lot of Eagles fans that think that the Eagles got to get better at safety. They got to bring in Justin Simmons or something like that. I think the Eagles really, really, really like Reed Blankenship. I don't think they're looking for an upgrade at safety. Do you?
I don't think they would maybe be opposed to adding a safety at some point just for more, depth, because they only have really like 3 true full-time players there, not, including Avonte Maddox, who can obviously move over there. We saw some of that, but yeah, I mean, their actions show that they like Reed Blankenship because they didn't have to sign him to the extension that they did. They could have let him, if they really wanted to, and were kind of more skeptical, hit restricted free agency or go through that process. And instead they kind of just bought out that year and gave him the extension. And they should like him because he makes plays. He looks really good in practice. He knows where to be. That has been a calling card for him, I think, really even dating back to his rookie season. He has it above the shoulders at the safety position, and he has a knack for making plays on the ball. And I think he kind of gets criticized for some struggles down the stretch last year. And I'm not going to say that he was great, and he did have those struggles. Same time, the entire defense kind of fell off a cliff, as we know. And I also think that, he really took the brunt of some of these injuries that he had earlier in the season, and yet was still able to play through most of them. And in fact, I think I saw something this offseason that reminded me of, there was like I think it was the Bills game, the overtime game, where Reed Blankenship played like a record, and maybe an NFL record or almost close to it, of snaps in a single game. And even the entire season, he played like a ton of snaps.
They had that stretch where they were on the field for like 3-4 consecutive games, and unbelievable amount of defensive snaps. Yeah. And by the way, he missed the playoff game. I think a lot of people, obviously AJ wasn't there, and that was the focus, and they really struggled without him, but they really struggled without Reed Blankenship.
Yeah.
Defensively. And he was out, and that's a concern because he had 3 different injuries, but he only missed 1 game each time. You'd like to see him stay on the field. So
agree.
But he plays such a physical style of football. Maybe you're going to see a couple games missed each year, but I think he's a good player. And I think people just default to, oh, he was undrafted. We just went through this with TJ Edwards. At some point, you got to say, all right, that guy can play. I'm at that point with Reed Blankenship.
Yeah, and TJ Edwards is now a guy we all wish. I think, at least if you're a fan of the Eagles, we all wish was still here for the linebacker's sake. BLG, I want to ask you about something that, to be honest, hasn't been talked about much at this point of the year because it's passing camp and you don't see a lot of line play. You don't see a lot of defensive linemen. Where are you with Josh Sweat going into this year? Is he a stock up, stock down for you right now? What's your expectation of him going into the year? The reason I ask is because the Hassan Reddick news is out there and he's not showing up. So Howie can wave his pom-poms a little bit about moving on from him. But what's that mean for Josh Sweat going into the 2024 year?
I mean, I don't love the jersey number change for starters. Right. 94 to 19 is a really bizarre.
94 was great. 94 was a great number.
Yeah, that's a great number. Especially for a big, kind of lanky, physically imposing defensive end.
Maybe like him. You just want to be listed as a linebacker.
Yeah, basically.
But I don't understand that. Hopefully we'll talk to Josh. We'll get to ask him that question. That was strange. Yeah, that was maybe it's something in his youth. I don't know.
I guess getting closer to the 9. He used to wear the 9 at
maybe that's
Florida
it.
State.
Yeah.
But and obviously you can't wear it here. So I guess, but he already had 9 in the 94. So
that's true. Yeah,
I don't really get it. But to answer the question, outside of the jersey number, I mean, it's like a huge year for him because he finishes last year ice cold. 1 sack in I think it was the playoff game, but basically since the bye week, the regular season didn't have a sack. And now was potentially, considered to be a cap casualty, there was some thought the Eagles just might cut him, at least some based on the reporting that was out there.
Yeah.
And now he will be a free agent after this season. So there's like all the pressure in the world for him to step up and prove that, he can handle probably more snaps. I'm guessing Vic Fangio might, play him a little bit more, or at least similar to what the Eagles were at last year. So there's a ton of pressure on him.
Yeah.
Speaking of
the follow up though, the thing that concerns me is last year he fell off a cliff because it seemed like he was getting too many snaps.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how his snap number is going to go down. Me and John talked about it a little bit.
No,
you relying on Brandon Graham to take more snaps? I mean, to get rid of, to make Josh Sweat's number go down? I don't see it. You got rid of Reddick.
Mm-hmm.
I think Josh Sweat's going to play even more this year, potentially. That scares me.
Yeah, well, that's another problem I had with the Reddick move is just that like the rotation was already not deep enough last year based on how they're using it.
On Nolan Smith too. That's another guy.
Yeah, and now it's thinner. But hey, I mean, I think that's what you're just going to have to do. You're going to have to sink or swim with some of your depth there and see if they can actually handle it or not.
Yep.
It's counterintuitive, but Zander brought that up, so I'll bring it up to you. I don't know if I said it, but I'm starting to think, Brandon's done after this year. He doesn't need to be on a pitch count anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So why can't he play
That's a good point.
more? Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah, maybe he wants to play a little bit more too.
Yeah.
It's knowing, like you said, knowing that this is it for him and he can kind of empty the tank here. So yeah, I think that's actually a really good point.
Yeah. I think it's a great point. I just struggle with the idea that Josh, and I agree, John. I actually do. I think Brandon Graham's going to want to play more, but like logically, I'm like 35-year-old takes snaps away from Josh Sweat. I don't really see that, especially in the NFL. But hey, maybe I guess it's a possibility.
Well, if you're a Super Bowl contender, again, it's a little bit different. And Brandon's still pretty productive with a limited amount of snaps. Obviously, he's got to be productive. If he falls off a cliff because of his age, that's an issue. But I mean, I think he'd be willing, and there's no need for a pitch count at this point for this being it for him. So I think it's one of those outside the box way of thinking about it that may happen, but most of it comes to Nolan Smith. Nolan Smith has to step up and play significant snaps. No question about that. And I don't know if that's a good position to be in, but he looks a little bit bigger, BLG. He's been in the weight room. They fixed the shoulder, even though he doesn't like to talk about it. He was the 30th overall pick. A lot of people thought he might be the 13th overall pick. So he's got talent. Why did people close the door on Nolan Smith?
I think, people take the signal from him not playing a lot last year and the coaching staff not trusting him. And I think that's fair. When a coaching staff doesn't play a player, it can indicate that they're not ready or good enough. But I also think there are times where the coaching staff gets it wrong. And I think they got it wrong with Nolan Smith to the point of where he wasn't playing enough. They could have rotated him more in last year. And I think when they did use him, they were trying to get a little too cute with it, a little too creative, and having him drop in different things where I would like to see him kind of just get more of the traditional, be able to go after the passer. And, the kind of, when you think about Nolan Smith and him being relatively undersized, you would think he might not be the best run defender. Not the case. He's actually, I think, really good.
He was actually very good in
setting the edge. So I don't worry about that. And therefore, that's a kind of a nice baseline to have. At the very least, he's not going to be a liability in run defense. He's going to set the edge. Okay, now give him those reps to actually see if he can get better and improve as a pass rusher.
Yeah, I think the pressure's on with Nolan Smith this year. I mean, if we can, in our minds real quick, go ahead to a year from now. If Quinyon Mitchell plays 40 snaps or whatever Nolan Smith played last year, we're not going to be happy. I feel like Nolan kind of blending in right now because remember, he had Jalen Carter taken in that first round too. So everybody was focused on Jalen Carter. Nolan Smith is still a first round pick. It's time to put up or shut up, I would say, for Nolan Smith, even here in year 2. So definitely a big
and maybe Jalix Hunt is a prodigy. We all think he's a developmental project, and it probably is, but who knows? Maybe he's just the natural, and maybe he factors into it as well. So a lot of projection though, and Bryce Huff better be a player as well, number one. But the Reddick stuff coming out with the Jets, I mean, if Howie wanted to spike the football, he could spike the football. Anybody who thought Hassan Reddick was coming back to play on the final year of his contract, they were nuts. And that's sort of playing out with the Jets as well, Where would you have gone with Hassan Reddick? There's reports he wanted $25 million. He's going to be 30. Did you still want him back now that it's clear that what he wanted and what needed to happen if he was going to come back?
I would have made a better effort to make it work than the Eagles did, which to me kind of was just like a non-starter for them and drawing a line in the sand for an aging kind of player. But I just think that like sometimes you make an exception, and I think the exception to make is for him. And I don't think, the Jets' mishandling of Reddick, I think, since the trade doesn't mean like the Eagles were totally justified in making the trade. It kind of just speaks to more, to me, how dysfunctional and dumb.
Oh, yeah, the Jets are dysfunctional.
Yeah, why do you make that trade without the deal in place already?
Right.
That's how I would do it. Yeah.
Right. But that
I
doesn't
just mean
he
he obviously wants a new rework contract.
Sure.
He wasn't coming back. There were some people who would argue with me that said he'd come back, and I said, after Bryce Huff at $15 million a year.
Yeah, no.
Never gonna happen.
See, but does $20 million a year get the deal done with Hassan? No, it's not what he wanted. I know he's asking for 25, but that's where I wonder. And BLG, I'll ask you. I asked Johnny Mack. Do you think this is more contract for the Eagles with him, or is it just the player? I mean, maybe they didn't want the headache of the player. By the way, Vic Fangio is also a defensive coordinator who strikes me. He's going to put you in different situations, and you're going to want to do it for him. Hassan was more of a one-trick pony. You heard him. He didn't like dropping in coverage. Vic Fangio strikes me as a guy that wants players to want to do what he asks them and be happy doing it and respect the coach to go and do it. Maybe they just didn't want the player.
If they did, I wouldn't think that's a good reason to me, just because, again, I just boil it down to fourth most sacks in the NFL since 2020. Yeah. It's like an amazing thing.
That's a lot of production. Yeah.
And again, I point this out often that last year he was on pace for a better year than he had even in 2022, even with coming into the season, with a slow start because of the cast on his hand.
Right.
But didn't get there because, they changed the defensive coordinator and were nonsensically having Hassan Reddick drop way too much. So they kind of sabotaged him in that way. But I've seen no signs of a Hassan Reddick slowing down. And I think I'm comfortable projecting that he's still going to be productive beyond his 30s because, number one, he didn't play a lot earlier in his career. So I think he has a lot of gas left in the tank. And number two, pass rushers can age gracefully. We're just talking about Brandon Graham. That's a player who can still contribute. Yeah. And BG just had a career season 2 years ago. So I don't buy the concerns there.
At Brandon Galton, make sure you follow BLG on X. Read him at Bleeding Green Nation. His winners and losers, send all hate mail to him, not to me. I get plenty of that. Good talking to you, BLG, and we'll see you next week.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, BLG. See you, brother. There's BLG joining us on Birds 365. Johnny Mack, what would you have paid Hassan Reddick? What would be a
20? I would have went to 21 million.
That's right about where mine would be. 20 to 21, maybe 22 if I really wanted the player.
I will say the dropping stuff, and Vic tends to drop more than others, and he's going to drop more. He's going to drop the edge rushers a little bit more than JG did and Sean Desai did. But that's overrated. It's not like he does it a million times. And I think a lot of Nick Sirianni even came over and stopped practice because he saw people writing about it. It's like, it's a passing camp. We're practicing that. There's no rush. So guys are out there practicing their coverage technique, and you saw Nolan Smith dropping a lot and other players dropping a lot, even Brandon Graham, Josh Sweat, guys like that. But even last year, the most Hassan Reddick dropped, and it was a late game, and I forget, I'll double check, but it was late in the season. He dropped 7 times. That was the high. That's it.
Yeah, how many defensive
people overrate that to a ludicrous degree. It's not that big of a deal. It's just a curveball in a game. In that particular game, the 7 times is a little bit too much. But even that, who cares?
Yeah, and I wouldn't rule out that you're going to see that this year, though, with Vic Fangio. That's why I asked the question. It's not so much about that I don't like the player. I just wonder if Vic is like, I don't want a guy that's going to give me a hard time if I need to drop him in coverage. You know, if that's what my defense calls for in that particular game, I'm going to do it. I need a guy that's willing to do it. And that's where I wonder that, plus the money, plus the, you know, the I don't know, maybe you've heard some talk that he was a little bit of a headache in the locker room. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm not in the locker room, but you have heard that. You've read that some places. I wonder if the whole thing added up for the Eagles to be like, just move this guy, you know, even if it's for a future condition.
I think it's got more to do with age, and I think
and money.
Yeah, age, money, shelf life. And you know, the adage is better to give up on a player a year early than a year late. I think that's where it comes into it. But you know, everybody points to Van Ginkel because Van Ginkel had such a great year with Mick in Miami, and I'm still surprised that the Eagles didn't try to sign him, to be honest, because he's a really good player. I think PFF had him. I'm trying to look it up real quick. Out of all edge defenders in the NFL, they had him number 7. Only players ahead of him were Myles Garrett, Micah Parsons, Nick Bosa, Max Crosby, T.J. Watt, and Khalil Mack. That's how good he was in Miami last year. And if you break it down even further, he was 7th as an actual pass rusher. He was first as a coverage player in those splat and hook defenders. So that to me is the perfect guy for Vic Fangio's defense. And a lot of people brought up and how we tried to compare Zach Bond to him, who hasn't done it. Maybe he projects it in that role. And he got hurt last season and he's still not cleared. And I don't even know what he was dealing with, some kind of foot injury. So maybe that factored into it as well. But I'm very surprised the Eagles didn't go after him in free agency.
Yeah, I thought so for sure, especially with some of the ties you heard to him and Vic. John, I got to ask you, though, people in the chat bring it up. I was thinking of it when you said it. Better to move a year early than a year late. Darius Slay, get the young guys out there.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm not saying that's not even a potential happening because, you know, PLG mentioned or Mike mentioned, one of them mentioned Bradbury. I mean, Bradbury went from an all-pro to falling off a cliff. So it always happens, you know, the only undefeated NFL person is Father Time. It's getting everybody. It took a while to get Tom Brady, but he got Tom Brady.
Yeah.
It happens to everybody. Could it happen to Slay? Yes. Is it realistic for them to move on? No. That's my only point.
Yep. All right. So fair enough. I'll agree to disagree with you. I agree that it's not an easy decision, but I do wonder whether how he's going to move on from one of these.
By the way, the Eagles were this close to moving on from Slay.
That's what I mean. Last year, it's not like this was like, oh, we wanted him to retire here. We love the guy. Like last year, he was basically off the roster for a week.
Well, the Eagles were, if you remember, they were trying to get CJ back. They wanted to get 2 of the 3 back. And it was CJ, it was Darius, it was James.
Right.
And the original plan was to get CJ and Slay back. And CJ was balking, thought they lowballed him. And then it became it became CJ and Brad. It became Slay and Bradbury. And then it became CJ and Bradbury because they worked out a deal. They thought Bradbury would get too much money and way more than he got, and he was willing to come back, and it didn't work out. But once they made the deal with Bradbury, they were still focused on CJ, and that's when it became CJ going to Baltimore. Excuse me, Slay going to Baltimore.
Yeah, Slay going to Baltimore. Yeah, no.
Apologize for getting all lumped up. So they were still working to get CJ back. And then it finally became clear it wasn't going to work. And then they went back to Slay. And evidently Big Dom was the one who gave him the call, which is funny in another way. But anyway, that's kind of what happened. It wasn't that they thought Slay was descending or declining. It's about they felt they only had the space in the room to get two of them back. And the original plan was to get Slay and CJ, but none of it worked out. And then other dominoes started to fall.
Yep, makes sense. Real quick, show enough brings up a good point. If you move on from Slay and one of your young corners gets injured, what do you got? It's a good point. I mean, you do have 4 young guys that are looking good with the 2 new draft picks, and then you have Ringo and you have Isaiah Rodgers, but you do make a good point where they have depth. You might as well not get rid of your depth. So I get it from that perspective. Johnny Mac, good show today. I thought Mike Gill was good. He brought a little bit of logic, I guess you could say, or an outsider's perspective from being in London. He comes in, he's like, I'm not making much of this Jalen Hurts comment, which was good to hear. And then we had BLG who brought some good insight as well. So pretty good show today. Good job by you. We'll be back here tomorrow. Good stuff, Johnny Mac.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody.
We appreciate everybody in the chat. Make sure you guys like the show on your way out. I don't know how many likes we're up to, but I'd like to get to 100. Oh, we're only at 77, guys. So hit that like button on your way out. It helps the show grow, and we appreciate all of you. James Jones, our resident Commander fan who got me to give him
the former receiver for the Packers, James Jones?
Yeah, he might be. He's our resident Commander fan. He actually, I'm sure you remember, he got me to give him a Commanders for $5. So pretty good stuff. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Hit the like button on your way out. We'll catch you tomorrow on Birds 365.
You've been listening to Birds 365, the destination for the passionate Eagles football fan who bleeds green. If it's Eagles football, we're talking about it. Debate inside the locker room and guests that are some of the greatest football minds from around the region. We hope you enjoyed the show. We know we had a blast. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with us on social media at JAKIB Sports. See you next time on Birds 365.